Hello and welcome to this week's Bastionland broadcast, where we are picking up where we left off last week, which is great because normally I leave it until a few hours before the stream to decide what I'm going to do on the stream, and I was actually incredibly glad that we had a two-parter because it means I knew what I was doing. Like this time last week, I knew. So yeah, we are going to get straight onto it because last week. I'm not going to go over everything we did last week because that video is available, but I went over my kind of process for creating a dungeon. Now, I realise that there is a dungeon creation process in Electric Bastionland, but this is kind of the down and dirty, this is what I tend to do in reality if I'm just planning a game like for tomorrow. So I feel like the technique in Electric Bastionland is probably more of a solid technique that I would recommend to people. This is more just a look at how I do it for a more traditional style of dungeon as well. This is more like a D&D dungeon than like something that is like purely Bastionland. But yeah, so last week we created this gorgeous map. I was thought about making prints of this map available, super high resolution glossy prints, but I don't want to accidentally become a best-selling artist. I want to maintain my integrity as a writer, so we're not going to be selling prints of this map, I'm afraid, but it does the job for what we need today. And we came up with the general idea of this sort of one floor dungeon, which is the Grief Factory. I can't even remember how we came up with the name. We kind of we did a lot of this is about kind of how to be creative, which sounds very grand, but what I like is when I look back at something I've made and I can't remember how I came up with it. So there's some things here that I don't remember how I came up with them, but there is one key technique that we are using because today we're going to be stocking a dungeon. So far we have a map. And we have a list of rooms with names. I realise I'm all over the place tonight. I'm very sorry. This is like the least structured start I've ever had to a stream. But yeah, hi to Remain83, said that I asked the chat. Yeah, I think the chat were involved with the title. I can blame you lot. And Stalker485, good to see you here. So we did a couple of example rooms. But I said we will stock the remaining 13 rooms this week, and we are going to stick to the same technique that I used last week for the general room concepts, which is put something in there, just put it in, it could just be a one word thing, it could be something super basic, put stuff in there and then go back and season that idea. So start with a very basic idea or a list of 3 very basic ideas, and then go back and add a twist or a development or an extra layer to each one until they are interesting. So we are going to do that for some of these rooms, but some of them are going to be a bit more basic. We're going to go one room at a time. The spooky room. This is the star of the show from last week, apparently. It's the only room that I remembered. So I don't know how we ended up with the spooky room. As a quick recap, the general theme for this is like grief, obviously. And we're going for like kind of an undead theme. Because undead is like such a cool theme. And it's not something I really get to dig into with my like Electric Bastionland stuff. Because it's a little bit too straight up fantasy, really. But we're going into undead today. So we have our Wandering Encounters, which gave us kind of this theme of grief floating around. And then we also have this factory element. So we sort of roughly split the dungeon into 3 sections, didn't we? We said rooms 1 through to 7 were going to be relatively mundane. Almost like a mini floor, if you like. Like this is the first floor of the dungeon. And then rooms 8, 9, and 10 are going to be a bit more weird. And then 11 through to 16 are going to be like full on bonkers. Because it's kind of like going into a mythic underworld, I suppose. So the spooky room Now, the first thought that comes into my head is to make it like a fake spooky room, like a really like a shitty ghost house you would get at like a fairground. But I know that I have done that I've done it in at least one dungeon, and I feel like I must have done it in another one. So it's such a trope that I keep going back to because for some reason that just sticks in with me. I think I've been on too many very disappointing fairground ghost trains in my life that it's just like stuck in my head. So if I ever find myself doing that, I could still put it in there because the people that I'm running this for, they might not have experienced that kind of room before, and it might be a fresh idea to them. But if I do feel like mixing it up, it's a good way of setting yourself like a kind of limitation. And I'm a big believer in that limitation breeds creativity. So my instinct would be to say, okay, it's a spooky room. It's like fake stuff. So there's like a skeleton hanging from the ceiling. And then in brackets you put that it's fake. And there are, hang on. WordPad is not cooperating. There we go. So there's a skeleton hanging from the ceiling. There is a ghostly noises like coming from I'm going to put a tape player because we are still in Electric Bastion end, I guess. But instead, when you find yourself going back to the same idea over and over again, I like to use that as like a motif and see how you can adapt it. So one way of doing that is inverting it. So what is the opposite of the spooky room? So you could have it be an incredibly calming room, like a really cozy room. And it's still got all these fake things in, but it's achieving the opposite. But another way of doing it is you have like, there's different ways you can invert it. So that's one way you could invert it. Another sort of inversion could be making it so that this is actually, it appears fake, but then rather than trying to appear real and then finding out it's fake, it appears fake and then you find out it's real. So let's do that. So we'll still have the skeleton hanging from the ceiling. But so it can reanimate. Reanimates if spoken to. What's this guy's deal? He's so we'll come back to him. We'll say reanimates when spoken to. Ghostly noises. I'll say they're coming from a hole in the wall. So we want this to like appear like it's like some shitty fake spooky room to begin with. And let's have one more thing. What else would you have in like a bad ghost house? I guess like a big spider. Let's replace the skeleton with a spider. So I'll have a giant. Well, you know what? Let's combine them. A skeletal spider hanging from the ceiling. And yes, I know that spiders don't have skeletons, but we're taking a greater view of undeath here. This is like a spirit of death. It doesn't have to be an actual spider's skeleton. Ghostly noises coming from a hole in the wall, and what else would you have in there? Oh, man, I'm missing the most obvious thing. Painting on the wall, and it depicts a family. Eyes appear to follow you. Creepy painting is like key. Cryfex. I'm going to steal this idea, so I'm going to give you credit now, Cryfex. Ghostly noises are coming from a tape, but only because the ghost is lazy and reading a newspaper while the tape does the booing for it. That's like the perfect tone for what I would normally put in a dungeon, so I'm going to steal that. So yeah, so we've got our initial idea, and then we can go back and season it. So we'll get back to the ghost. Skeletal spider. So it's a real spider made from like bones hanging from the ceiling. Reanimated spoken to. Friendly, but lashes out if anybody questions why this spider has a skeleton. An endoskeleton is, I guess, the word I'm after. Endoskeleton. Come on now. An endoskeleton. There you go. So you can have stupid ideas as long as you hang a lamp on them and you're happy for them to come up in the game. Ghostly noises, yeah, coming from a hole in the wall. Tape player is visible. Real ghost is asleep behind the fake wall. Now this is a silly room. Like, there's no getting around it. We've gone straight in with like a really stupid room, but I think it's fine to have. I don't mind a dungeon that has like a bit of tonal up and down. I mean, tonal consistency can be good, but I don't think it needs to be, especially for the purposes of this example. I don't think tonal consistency is necessarily entirely needed. I think like some of the most memorable films and things that I've experienced have had like a sudden gear shift of tone that sort of hits you very suddenly. So the painting on a wall depicts a family, eyes appear to follow you. So we need to make this like this is actually a legit thing. Because I like the idea that players might see this skeletal spider and kind of think, oh well, this is fake because spiders don't have a skeleton, an endoskeleton. And then they might hear these ghostly noises and see that it's coming from a tape player. And then I want this painting on the wall to be like a real hazard. And it's like a super cheap trick, but having like somebody reach out from the painting and grab you is like, I like that as like a punctuation mark to this silly room suddenly having something kind of horrific. So eyes appear to follow you. If you get too close, their hands grasp at you. Dex save, or what's the consequence here? So you could just have it like be that it causes damage, but that's not especially interesting. I like it when I'm talking about like things like where you might traditionally have like level drain or strength loss from like a ghost touching you. I like it when it actually steals something from inside you. Getting pulled into the painting is a good one, but I know that I've used this before. Which dungeon was this in? There was a dungeon where there was like a I can't remember what I called her. It was a type of dryad, but it was like a scrap metal dryad, and she would like pull people into like her realm and then spit them back out, and they come out like old because they've been in there for like a lifetime, which is horrible. But I think for this case, I want them to steal something, or they steal all memory of your own family. So this like might be nothing because, as we all know, D&D characters especially tend to have no family. They tend to like their family were all wiped out in something. But this could come up, I guess, and I think it's just kind of funny that like, well, I say it's funny. It says a lot about my sense of humor that the idea of losing all memory of your family is funny. But like, if that happened to my character, I think I would play that up, and it would then become like, if the GM says to me, yeah, now you can't remember your family. Even if I hadn't thought about them before then, it sets some nice little seeds for further down the line about trying to rediscover your family. And that's the kind of thing that I really like, because it's a small, weird thing in a dungeon that might not affect anybody. And it might affect some character and they just kind of don't do anything with it. But for the right player or the right character, this will just like snowball into like a major part of their story, it could be. And I love things like that where two different groups going into the same dungeon, like on two different games, might have entirely different campaigns that branch out from that. So there we go, spooky room done. Now we're going to smash through these 4 a little bit quicker, because I'm already aware that I've set myself a kind of an impossible task to do this in an hour and talk about it. So Coffin Chamber. So what I like to do in these rooms, if I'm ever struggling, it's good to look at what's around it and provide some contrast. So room number 4 at the moment, it's after room number 2, which is like there's nothing. Let's say there's nothing in there. Like it's a what I would call a quiet room, in that there's no immediate hazard and there's no immediate reward. It's like a pacing room. It's a verse. It's there to be passed through, and it still has interesting things in it, but it's not like a destination room. So I feel like we could make 4 a little bit more interesting, or we could kind of like, you could pace ourselves and make 6 like a much more interesting room. I think we might do that. So I think we're going to make number 4 a relatively mundane room, and then the Roost is going to be something a little bit more impactful. So Coffin Chamber, it's okay to just have straight up rooms that are what they say. So for Coffin Chamber, as a contrast to the spooky room, which is like full of stupid stuff, we could just have pile of smashed coffins. You'll notice what I've forgotten to do already is the doorways out of the different rooms. Now, we spoke about that last week, and I spoke about how I make these work, but weirdly it takes quite a long time to like add these to every room. So you're gonna have to pretend that these are written down for every room, because I'm not gonna. You'd rather me spend time filling the rooms with stuff than doing that. So pile of smashed coffins. Is there anything to discover about them? It could literally be that they are empty inside. It could be nothing. Now, if we did leave it at that, what I would like to do later on is I would like to include something down the line that maybe relates to these coffins. So something that wants a coffin, or something that's like obsessed with coffins. I mean, there were some of these wandering encounters. I'm sure one of them... the Undertaker skeletons were trying to get the dead back into their graves. So you could maybe use these smashed coffins to distract the Undertaker skeletons and say, oh, mate, you're after... If you're looking for undead, we found a load of smashed coffins back there. You might want to head back and check that out. And then they'll go scurrying off. So, not every room needs to be the spooky room. This is your album track. It sounds bad. It sounds like I'm saying it's filler, but it kind of is. Like, it's good to have these ups and downs and this pacing, and you don't want a dungeon to be entirely empty, these kind of empty-ish rooms, because there's just nothing there. But it's good to have the variety. Number 5, Cobwebs. So this is sitting between the spooky room and the Roost, which is going to be a more significant room. It's also acting as like a branching off point to go through the threshold. So I think we could make this room not so much a hazard, but make it kind of undesirable. So to passing through it is kind of a big deal, but it's not innately dangerous. So Cobwebs, it's an obvious fit here. So we could have, cobwebs, thick cobwebs, filling the entire room. And then we could have it crawling with normal spiders, which, when you're talking about giant spiders, you're like, oh, normal spiders, but you might not want to squeeze through this cobweb filled room full of spiders. Now obviously you can, if you play D&D even once, you can light fire to the cobwebs. Has anyone actually tried this? Like, I don't want to go and burn a load of cobwebs and kill a load of spiders, but I feel like D&D has taught me that like cobwebs will just ignite and go up like tissue paper. But I feel like spiders that live in dungeons would have like evolved to like create non-flammable webbing at this point. So thick cobwebs fill the entire room, crawling with normal spiders, and you could have that it's concealing a pit, containing a sudden drop onto jagged rocks. So I think, yeah, it's kind of like it's essentially a pit trap in structure. And anyone that's heard me talk about traps before is that I always like to signal the trap. So you might be thinking, well, you've just hidden a pit trap behind these cobwebs. But yeah, but players aren't just going to run into these cobwebs unless they're running away from something blindly, or they're just being rash, in which case they deserve to fall into the trap. So we're gonna put like a little pit trap there. Now the roost. So we do have wandering encounters here. So any monster that is listed in a room, for me, that room has to be like their lair, or like they have to be tied to that room somehow. I don't want them to just like happen to be there, because that's what the wandering encounters are for. Like, this is their room, I would say. So the roost, I'm imagining like a big bird, obviously. So let's just make it like a giant raven. A giant raven is a very like 2nd edition D&D monster. So giant raven perched atop a pile of... So this is like the grief room, isn't it? So it's going to be like, we're going to put them perched atop a pile of scrap. And upon closer investigation, it has broken eggs, bird bones. So they are grieving their nest. Now, with these sort of big tentpole monsters that you sort of put in like a room and this is their place, it's a fine balance, because I always like to have monsters that the players can bypass without fighting them. That's just how I like to do things, and I find it more interesting that way. But you don't want to make it so that it's like a non-decision. You don't want to be like you walk into the room and there's a dragon in the corner and they're just sat in the corner, then they're quite content on their big comfy cushion, and then the players are going to just walk past it. You want to either have the monster take some kind of cost for passage, or have it that the monster is providing there's some kind of reward behind the threat of the monster. So for this one, I feel like it's more of an obstacle rather than a risk reward thing. So we can look on the map and we can see that they're actually blocking the entrance to the buried hoard. So we can put that here. Blocks the entrance to room 7. And we would detail that corridor or that tunnel. And then we'll make a monster. Because at the moment, Giant Raven, it doesn't sound very exciting. I'm not getting pumped up about having a Giant Raven in there. 12 HP. I guess they're pretty big, so they can have armor 1. I'm imagining them being pretty big, you know. Beak, D10. Or the wings, like they can like buffet the wings at you. But this isn't like a monster that's going to be like super interesting in terms of its abilities. We're going to make it interesting in other ways. So, squawks in a hostile manner at anybody that is not visibly grieving. So they'll let you past if you're grieving. But if you're going to put that's like a key for a lock, is that you know that you need to be pretending to be grieving to pass through safely. So we need to put that in. We need to put the key somewhere. So we've created the lock, which is knowing about this, and now we need to put the key somewhere. So we could just like write it straight in there, but I would assume, if it were me running this, that if the players are able to talk to any of these encounters, or they talk to this, if they manage to get this spider on friendly terms, one of these, they will know about this giant raven, and if they ask them about the raven, they might be able to help them out. So I don't want to just put one key somewhere and say, well, you've got to find this particular non-player character, and they will tell you, oh, to get past the raven, you have to pretend to grieve. I would rather sort of try and encourage the GM to always be thinking about how this key could exist in multiple places, if that makes any sense. So they will do that. What do they want? That's always a key thing with monsters. Wants to see everybody as miserable as they are. And then we'll give them one like weird combat thing just to make it so that if they do turn into a fight, it's actually a bit more interesting. So if they kill an enemy, they try to call a ceasefire so that a funeral can be arranged and immediately performed. So, they might kill one of you, but then they're going to take the opportunity for a bit more grieving. I want to give this thing a little bit more HP because I want this thing to survive long enough to perform this funeral. So there we go. So we could also flesh out this room a little bit. So we could have like a high ceiling, beams crisscrossing. There we go. And then the buried hoard, which is like behind the raven. So you can just make like a room that has treasure. So you could have like gold and silver. I guess like jewelry. I'm sure there was a word I was trying to... Ornaments, like, yeah. Gold and silver ornaments. Value... if we're using Electric Bastion land, I'd probably say... I'd make this £1,000. I think we make the main treasure like £5,000 normally. Oh no, we did say this was going to be like the main treasure, didn't we? Value £3,000. But the raven will not let you take this, even if you are grieving. So the grieving trip will get you in, but it won't get you out. Yeah, Magpie might have made more sense if they were just hoarding this stuff themselves, but I kind of get the impression that this raven is just here to like be miserable and drag people down. Like I think they don't care about this hoard. I think the hoard was already there. It was some kind of like burial mound or something. Okay, and then I've just deleted a thing saying threshold because we are now into the next sort of section of the dungeon, which is these 3 rooms. So I mean, I said I was going to make this mundane, and then we've already got a load of weird stuff in there. But I think the environments have kind of been, cave, room. So I think here we can afford to make things a little bit more weird, underground, like, doesn't need to make sense. And then we've... Yeah, sorry, I thought we missed a room for a second. So we completed this kind of first section. So, at the risk of over-explaining this point, part of the reason behind having all these kind of loops in the structure of the dungeon is that at the moment there's no room other than room 1, because there's only one entrance to this dungeon, unfortunately. There's no room that's essential. There's no single room that is essential. Like, if you want to get to room 13, let's say, the furthest possible point, the only rooms that are essential are 1 and 12. Like, you can get there any number of ways. So the thing I always need to remember is that, I like making dungeons that are full of just weird stuff, but you can afford to put in a lot of danger because there's always other ways around it. So I think we're going to make the very last section, we're going to make especially dangerous. But this middle section, we're just going to make this weird, so it feels like you're crossing a threshold into the really dangerous stuff. So, the crying room. I have to confess, I find this a lot more difficult than I thought I would, because normally I do tend to rely on like these spark tables and things like that. It's been like an interesting experiment, definitely. So the crying room. So the obvious thing is to like make it that the room itself is actually crying, and it adds to that weird, creepy factor. So maybe these 3 rooms are all going to be like weird, creepy rooms rather than like especially hazardous things. Because then, no matter which way you go, you're passing through at least one creepy room before you get to the seriously scary stuff. So, I'm going to have water dripping from ceiling. Faintly salty. Are tears actually salty? I can't think when I've tasted tears recently. And then, yeah, we're going to put like a weird effect in this room. So we might just have like a general, so like an unnatural silence in this room. And we're going to have anybody that stays in here longer than a few moments, which is like a very vague, unhelpful length of time to put in here. But I'm thinking like, well, a better word is like anybody that hesitates in here or lingers in here. That's a better word. Anybody that lingers in here starts to cry involuntarily. Then, if they stay longer, I'm so sorry about the punctuation in this document. This would not stand, but it's my notes. So what happens if they stay after the sort of the tears start to come? If they stay longer, they feel their lungs begin to fill with tears. Effectively the same as drowning. Effect wears off if they leave. So no one's really gonna, well, if you're gonna die to that, then you're playing it wrong, I have to say. So yeah, I'm aware. Yeah, Stalker says that's pretty freaky. Yeah, that's pretty horrible. But I want this to be like a shock to the system, because they may have just come from this spooky room straight into room 8. So I want it to feel quite a stark, like, bang, now you're into the grief factory. And this is all kind of like, this was your little starter. And then bang, here's your main course. Curtain maze. So, red curtains blocking your view from every angle. Passing deeper into the maze, the curtains are wet with blood. So yeah, it's still like silly. I was like silly ghost house stuff. Like that would be quite effective as a ghost house. But the thing to remember as well is you might be getting random encounters in here. So these rooms on their own are just kind of like, oh, let's get out of here. But you know, if you go into the blood curtain maze, and the celebratory banshees are in there. I mean, these are a little bit silly. Like, that is the thing that happens with this one more thing system, where you just keep adding and seasoning your ideas. In my experience, you kind of end up with things that are slightly weird to the point of silly. But so in here, we could tone this down if we wanted to provide a little bit more. I don't know, what's the opposite of levity? Like we want there to still be some serious impact in here. And then, the visitor center, the scariest place of all. I hadn't quite considered this one when I was thinking about thresholds. So again, this is something that I'm sure there was like a visitor center or a waiting room or something like that in Prison of the Worm Queen, now available on itch.io. And I'm sure I've put it in other ones that I've run. I don't know, it doesn't feel right here. So one piece of advice that I would give is, whereas I like limitation breeds creativity, don't be afraid to move away from your initial idea if it doesn't work anymore. So we're going to keep the title of Visitor Center, but nothing else. So let's take it literally, but go beyond that initial idea. So who would be visiting the grief factory? Like, what sort of person would be visiting? I guess you could have it be that, like, people who are mourning, like, kind of manifest in here. So let's have ghostly figures. And they are mourning, and they fade away as you get close. And then let's add just some general creepiness to the room. So we'll have writing on walls and floors, and it's just a list of names. Some fade away as others are carved in, or others appear. So this is another example of what I like to do. So you might have an idea for like what I'm going for here, but I also like to leave it open, because I think the players will. I think you need to give the players more credit than you might in certain areas. And I know that I've gone on big rants before about giving the players more information than you think they need. But really, when I'm talking about giving the players lots of information, I'm talking about helping them make decisions. I think give your players information about the stuff that they need to make hard choices about. Like, is there a pit trap in front of me? You know, just put the pit there. But when it's like flavor stuff like this, and it's like tone, I think sometimes less is more. So, I mean, it's not the world's most subtle writing here. Like, this is pretty blunt. But I feel like some other dungeons that I've seen would, like, explain it and say, oh, this means X, Y, Z, and you'd have a character there ready to explain it. Video games are especially bad for this. Like, I can picture like playing something like a game where you came into this room and there's an NPC pops up, and then they just explain to you in text, like, look, as these new names appear and others disappear, this represents this. But if you just spotted this out the corner of your eye, and then you went and found it, it's like a nice little Easter egg. So we are through the threshold. We're now into the grief factory, the lantern store. So I feel like this could be like a really useful item to have, whatever these lanterns represent. So we can have shelves filled with lit lanterns. So carrying one. I feel like it could help you out in some of these other areas. So carrying one earns you causes the curtains in room 9 to part for you. In fact, this is going to be complex enough that we're going to make this into like an arcana or an oddity. So we're going to call this what's the opposite of grief? I'm just going to call it like a wake lantern. And we'll come back to this and explain how it works. Shelves filled in with lit lanterns. No, okay, we're just going to have one with shelf filled lantern, one of which is lit. And then we'll give it a little bit more flavor. We'll have a sealed like an iron box, locked. Locked. What's in there? You can put like some minor treasure in there. Like, it's fine to just have there be a little reward for getting this far. So what would be useful in a lantern? Let's have like a silver lamp lighter worth. I'm literally imagining one of those long candle lighters that you get. Symbol lamp lighter worth, it's worth £500. Not to be scoffed at. And the wake lantern. So when you carry this, I want it to like make the earlier areas like a little bit more straightforward for you. So I thought about having like the curtains in the curtain maze will part for you, and like the spider webs will part for you. But it's a little bit rubbish to have it like just work in this dungeon, because then you might be saving it up and taking it back, and then when you get it outside it's kind of useless. So rather than give it like a load of bespoke interactions with this specific dungeon, let's think of ways that we could make it more generally useful while still being useful within this dungeon. So it can be lifted to your eye, letting you see through a single wall or obstacle. It dims the lamp, and it can only be relit in the lantern store. So it's still kind of a bit crap if you get it out, because what, you're going to come back to this dungeon to relight your lantern. But you know, you might find another way. Yeah, let's forget everything I just said. It can only be relit. Got it. Immediately after attending a funeral. It's the wake lantern. You know, it's the light after the grief. Factory floor. So this is the grief factory. We're finally here, and I still haven't decided what I want the grief factory to actually be. So I feel like this is such a big room here that I'm going to come back and do that last. Yeah, sorry to tease. I am going to get to it. Bear with me. I'm going to top up my drink and then I'll be right back. Okay, refreshed. So, no, we will do the factory floor now, because I think that will help dictate what all the rest of this stuff does. So, what is the factory floor? I mean, I'm still like struggling to get a sense of this grief factory as a thing. So let's go back to our encounters, because we had unionized Wraith workers on strike. So I guess that they've like abandoned the factory floor. So let's use our sort of seasoning idea, because I'm drawing a blank. But what would be in a factory? Let's start. So I'm imagining like a big like mill style industrial revolution like factory, where like a cotton mill or something, and there's, you know, iron walkways around the outside. Iron walkways around the perimeter. Then we'd have like large machinery in the middle, and then maybe there's like maybe just one large machine, and maybe there's like a conveyor belt leading into the machine. So the iron walkway around the perimeter. I feel like this is already like setting up to feel like a place where you could have interesting combat. So we're going to come back to the walkway, because I don't think it needs anything really. So we'll just have like Rusty and liable to break in. No, and Rusty and falling apart in places. Large machine. So what's going into this grief machine and what's coming out? I guess like these tiers are like a thing. So I guess on the conveyor belt is filled with buckets of water, lightly salty. So there's like buckets of tears going into the machine, but it's like a stopped conveyor belt. Currently stopped. If restarted by the Wraith workers, it begins to process the tears into hostile wraiths. So yeah, you might think about, well, maybe we can help these, these unionized wraith workers. I don't know. How would you get them? How would you even get back to work? Like, you don't know who their employer is. How are you going to negotiate with them? Maybe we'll get to that. But if it's restarted, I'm not going to have by the wraith workers. If restarted with a large red button, it begins to process the tiers into hostile wraiths. So they're obviously going to hit that big red button and start the machine up, and it's going to start processing the tiers and producing wraiths. I'm assuming that's how wraiths are made, from tiers. 13, the altar. So there's Captain Lucky Luke said about having a canteen. I would normally like that, but it's a little bit. I want this area to feel a bit more weird. So the altar, maybe the altar is like the wraith's boss, because like this is how they commune with like death. So large stone altar with skull motif. I'm just going to make this slightly silly. Placing both hands allows... Placing both hands on the altar. As that person to converse with death itself. Death answers bluntly and punishes anybody. Death answers bluntly. If death thinks you are trying to game the system, then death dispatches D6 hostile wraiths. If in doubt, throw out some hostile wraiths. Now I haven't statted up these wraiths, but we can make it work as we go. So this is like the phone to head office. So we could go back to here now, and we could like make this on strike. Wanting better treatment from death. Yeah, Captain Lucky Luke says about having like a compressed air tube, so you like have to write a question to death and send it up, and it goes. And I do like that a lot, but I'm not going to go back and change it now because I've got 5 minutes to write three rooms. The tier elemental. So this is like, I guess the tiers are like backing up, because here we've got in room 12 we have like the conveyor belt of tiers. Room 14, this is like where the tiers will be stored. So we'd have like this room would have a fountain, which is overflowing with water. Anybody touches the water, then the elemental manifests. So, tier elemental. Let's do it. So, this might be one of those ones that's... bear with me, I need to do some moderation in the chat, which is surprisingly difficult to do in the software that I use. This is where I get my this is where I need to get a full-time community mod. There we go. So, tier elemental. Yeah, this is where I might have one of those monsters where like you can't just outright fight them, which I do like. Let's have a... So we'll give them like some HP. Captain Lucky Luke. If anything, I'd like to be less famous. every week I'm close to deleting my Twitter account. So if we're going to have them, but basically what I'm thinking is make them immune to normal attacks. I've just noticed, by the way, we didn't actually give this Raven any like ability scores, which I think says a lot about how I design monsters. Because you might think I'll give them a high strength score, but you can do a lot with just, you know, HP armor attacks. So we'll stick to that as well. Immune to normal attacks, but can be damaged by... So what would damage water? I guess like you would say like ice or lightning, but these characters aren't like wizards that are like throwing stuff around. Electricity, I guess, because, you know, some would argue that it's a theme of this game. Damaged by electricity, or anything that can be damaged by electricity. Here we go. So it's tears. So how do you make it not tears? You dilute it. Anything that would significantly dilute or pollute its tears cause D12 damage. So that's a lot, but I like rewarding players that like think about it and are like, well, it's made of tears, so if we like are able to douse it with water, it's like diluting its power. Now, yeah, you might think that's just as likely to increase its power, but you know, you got to have some of these weird things that you can take a risk on. And then we'll give it its three little things. So what does it want? I think you can have sometimes just a kind of a dumb monster that's there to attack. So attacks anybody that comes into its chamber. We'll give it like a weird critical damage thing. We'll do it both ways. So when it takes critical damage and when it causes critical damage. Because this is kind of a straight up fighty monster, really. You know, I do like them now and then. So when it causes critical damage, you can just have like a really horrible death effect. But I like to instead have something that like causes a crisis. When it causes critical damage... the victim is dragged into the fountain and begins to drown. So you can't just wait till the end of the combat. You've got to go in and get them out now before they drown. When it takes critical damage, so an obvious thing would be that it like explodes and causes damage, but that's kind of a bit rubbish. So when it takes critical damage, it explodes, showering all in the chamber. Who cannot stop crying for the next hour? Yeah. No, until they leave the dungeon. There we go. So it's handy for helping you get past the Raven, because he'd be quite glad that you're doing that. You know what? We've got 2 rooms left. At the risk of being a terrible person, I am going to leave those 2. No, you know what? Let's do it. So I'm really sorry today. I am like feeling quite tired and struggling slightly with the stream today. So I appreciate everyone's patience. But we're going to do these 2. So forgotten names. We've already kind of done the name thing a little bit. So what can we put here? So we'll start with the basic thing and then we can work from there. So bookshelves loaded with books. Every book is a list of names. So could leave it there. Let's add one more thing. We'll put a librarian in there.
So bookshelves loaded with books. Every list is a book of names. A hunched figure patrolling the aisles. Like a hooded figure. They are immaterial underneath their hood. Stops occasionally to reorganize a shelf. So they're not hostile, they're just there to kind of do their thing. Not hostile, but wants you to leave things alone in here. So yeah, it's just a weird library. Every book's a list of names, but we could make some of these useful. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank for that one. Sorry, we're ending with a whimper here. But we'll do the Skeletal Garden because I do like this. So we wanted like plants made from bones. Then we'll have like a large bone topiary. I've never used the word bone topiary before, but it feels so right. Large bone topiary lion. And we're not going to make that a monster because it's too obvious to have that come to life. So these are kind of like filler rooms a little bit because we've got these wandering encounters. So I will save that. I will post this somewhere in case you do really want to run the Grief Factory. But hopefully that gives a bit of insight into the process of like the more informal way of doing a dungeon that I would generally do if I was just preparing something to run with friends or something like that. Thank you for watching. As always, if you are interested in anything going on with Bastionland, you can go to bastionland.com. Special thank you to all the Patreon subscribers and all of the new ones that have come on board since I restructured it. If you're interested in supporting the stream and the podcast and the website and the blog, then head over to patreon.com/Bastionland. And yeah, so thank you again for watching. And next week we'll be doing possibly an RPG read through. Not this one, but while I'm here actually, this arrived in the post for me today, which is Ken, which is a game very much inspired by Into the Odd. It's by Yokai Gal, and they very kindly sent me a copy. And if you liked Into the Odd, check out Ken, and hopefully next week I will be reading a different role-playing game if I can get things lined up. But until then, goodbye for now.